All right. Oh, Miguel, it is so good to see you
Great
today.
to see you too.
Wow, we're gonna go live stream. We're gonna stream. We're on StreamYard. We're still working our way through this, but we're just gonna go live stream and not worry about any pictures today. And there's so much to talk about. First, Miguel, I want to hear what's happening in Paris now that they say they're going to open everything up again.
Well, everything's slowly slated to open up. So by the 19th of this month, the stores should be back open. And by the 9th of June, everything should be open. And they're actually looking to try to get tourists to come back to Paris, which is going to be interesting.
You
Yeah.
know, I worry about that. I know that people are telling me, "Oh, we're going back. Are you going to go? We're going to go to Paris." But I'm like, do you all have your vaccinations? And some people, yes. Some people, no. You're not going to be able to go unless you're vaccinated.
So,
And the French are not. You tell me, Miguel. You're there on the ground. I'm in Oakland. You're in France.
well,
Are
from
the French being vaccinated?
they are, but at a very slow rate. This has been the problem. You know, there have been French people have commented to me that that we're moving faster in the United States than in France. So I don't know what the holdup is. I don't know if it's a problem with acquiring the actual vaccination, if there's a shortage, but it's not moving quite as fast. Now I know for my age group, and I won't tell my age, but
Okay,
it's
let's say the under 50s.
yeah, under 50s. The under 50s, I believe it's July, so there's still like a lot to be rolled out. But you can tell people are getting antsy.
Yeah, all over. I mean, we've had gatherings now of my age group. Everybody has to come in and show their vaccination card, and we're still like, don't kiss me,
Right.
don't try to shake my hand, don't kiss me. Let's just just get used to being in the same room, um, breathing the same air, and then we're either outside
Mhm.
or we are inside with air purifiers.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
that's where we've been rolling, especially since we now know that COVID is spread through the air.
Hmm.
And it's not just on surfaces.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's been a lot more, I guess, education in that sense from the since the beginning. The beginning, it was a lot of confusing information as to where should we wear masks or not. So at least that's kind of clear. The other thing is too is the variations, like in India,
yeah.
they've been having their problems. So
Mhm.
we'll see.
So of course, people are like, "Yay, we're going back to Paris! We're going back." I'm like, yeah, maybe not. I might wait for a while.
Right. Right.
Wait
Well,
until
that
the
makes
end of
sense.
the year. I don't know if they're being, quick. Um, if they're being greedy, not greedy, but the Paris is a city that it's probably number one source of income is tourism.
Yeah. The
And
hotels have been hit hard.
yeah, but I don't ever want anyone to come and take our Black Paris tour and be jeopardized by COVID. So what do
Right.
you think we should do, Miguel, with Black Paris tours?
I think if we do live versions, it has to be outside, and
Mhm,
we have to wear a mask,
mhm.
even if you are vaccinated, just to be overly cautious, because there's the danger of being inside with stale air. Eating, you have to take your mask off. Plus, you don't know if that person next to you is vaccinated or not. So it's better just to have a shorter tour, in my view, and a safe tour, which
Okay,
is in
so,
the open
so
air.
there you have it, everybody. We're going to be doing our 2/3 day tours once we do get back.
Mhm.
And we will be taking every precaution to make sure that no one says, I took the Black Paris tour and I came back from France with COVID.
Right,
We don't want that.
right.
I'm very proud that March 7th of 2020, we had a major Black Paris tour event here in Oakland, close to 170 people. And we were blessed that not one person contracted COVID. That was just like on my mind, heavy. So we want to make sure, first, I want to make sure that my senior scholar guides are safe and that the whole Black Bears Tour crew is safe. And it's kind of like, it's like flying a plane. We don't want to crash first because we don't want our crew to crash, and we don't want you to be sick either. So that's that. So, Miguel, I'm so excited. For Mother's Day, my Mother's Day gift was a 4-day trip to Los Angeles. And while we were there, one of our dear friends, Eric, you met him, award-winning technical director for CBS News, and Eric sent us to Pasadena with the understanding that Pasadena and a city that's further up the hill, Pasadena's in the hills, mountains overlooking the smog of LA. And Pasadena was where, I have to tell the whole story. In 1859, there was a white American named John Brown. And Miguel, you probably know more about the raid than I do.
Well,
do you know about that? Do you want
to? Not fully the full details of the raid, but I do know that he as a personality said that the idea of just being for abolition wasn't good enough, that you had to be able to act upon it, and that he pretty much stated if he lost his life doing it, so be it. But he was a radical.
He was a serious, and he was a banker. At one time, he had amassed.
Oh wow!
He had amassed a fortune of like $100,000 or $150,000, which would have been millions in today's money. We're talking about in the 1800s. In fact, he was born May 9th, 1800.
Wow!
And he was born in Connecticut. And he was walking this straight path, and then something flipped, and he's like, "Wait a minute! How can we enslave people How can we enslave people? And why are we enslaving Black people who are so brilliant and who have brought us so much?" He was married to a Black woman at one point. And I think she was his second wife. And so he decided that he was going to bring together these forces, and they were going to raid Harper's Ferry and steal guns and munitions, and they were going to give them to Africans who were enslaved to end enslavement.
Right.
I don't know all the details yet. I'm still researching, but it didn't quite happen that way. And John Brown and maybe 2/3 of his crew would be killed. They would be put on, it was a kangaroo court.
Right.
They would be executed. They would be hung, executed. Here's what's interesting to me. First time I ever knew this. These things don't happen in isolation. John Brown conferred with his friend, Frederick Douglass, and said, "This is what I'm thinking of doing. Why don't you join me?" And Douglass was like, "Let me think about this." And he said, "No, I don't think so. I'm already in hot trouble. You know, they've already got their sights on me. I can't do you any good."
Right.
And John Brown went to Harriet Tubman. And I think she just dismissed it out of hand. She was like, "Good luck." But after that raid, several things happened. Frederick Douglass had to leave the United States, went to Ireland. And that's when they created a statue that now is in County Cork, Ireland. He had to stay away for months. He had to stay away from his wife, his Black wife and children. And I think they were living in Rochester at the time, Rochester, New York. The other thing that happened was those members of John Brown's crew who managed to escape the law, they went to California. Now, this is what's perfect. You're going to love this, Miguel. These were some Black folks who had fled Louisiana Territory and gone to Mexico and hung out with the Mexicans.
Yeah, because Mexico at that time Uh, their first president of the Mexican Republic was a man by the name of Vicente Guerrero. He was black,
I
and
knew you know that.
he abolished slavery. And this caused a big problem for the slave states in the United States, the plantations, because they wanted to get that territory that they had taken away from Mexico, but they wanted even more territory because they were irritated with Mexico basically allowing in these refugees, and they didn't like that. Just one thing about Frederick Douglass in Ireland. Frederick Douglass became very good friends with an Irish politician. His name was Connell, and O'Connell was a staunch abolitionist. He was incredible. He actually called out the Irish Americans for not joining with African Americans and saying, "How could you forget how the English treated us and you go over there?" There's a whole story with the bishop at the time, but I thought I'd mention that. That's how
Thank you.
tight the Irish were with Frederick Douglass. This is something that we don't think of because if you live in Boston, there's a certain history between,
Animosity.
yeah, animosity. That's the word.
The white Irish and how they have treated black people. Yes.
Yes. Yes. And this is something that the Irish in Ireland were calling them out. And I think it was O'Connell.
Mhm.
O'Connell or O'Donnell? It was O'Connell. His last name was O'Connell. And he called it the filthy aristocracy of skin, which is pretty biting. And there was another abolitionist. His last name was, I think it was Lennox. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but he got 75,000 signatures from Ireland for this petition to petition the Irish Americans to join with us.
Mm.
And it was ignored. But that history happened. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Thank you. I love it. We don't understand. It's not until you get outside of the box of racism in America that you understand who we are and who we've always been. I'm going to come back to what I witnessed in Pasadena and Altadena. Altadena, I kept saying, that's another town. They were like, yeah, Altadena is further up the hills. Okay, so let me just say this. Having traveled to Jamaica, and I was a travel reporter and did a story once on the Maroons of Jamaica who live way up in the cockpit country, way up in the mountains. And they defeated the British, and the British were like, okay, we're tired of fighting you. If you all just stay up there, we'll stay down here near the beaches and we won't bother you. Then when I went to Trinidad, it's the same thing in Trinidad. The wealthy people lived in the flatlands. We're talking about 1800s, because it wasn't until the mid 1900s, let's say the 60s and 70s, that they found ways to anchor the houses into the hills so they wouldn't fall down. The other thing is that the poor people, I mean dirt poor people, always lived up in the mountains. I saw the same thing in Haiti. The poor people lived up in the mountains, had beautiful views, and the wealthy people lived in the flatlands, because these colonies, these cities, these areas didn't come into existence or came into existence before transportation, before when we're still driving, wagons trying to do stuff. So the same thing, these Mexican Indians, Mexican black people fled enslavement, fled persecution, prosecution for those who were part of John Brown's ring, and went up into the mountains overlooking Los Angeles. And Miguel, they're still there. You would have laughed at me. All of you would have laughed at me. We're driving up this mountain up above Pasadena. Everybody knows Pasadena because that's where the Rose Bowl is held. Mm-hmm. It's where, who came out of Pasadena? Octavia Butler Jackie Robinson, Eric Ross, uh, some football players, and Bobby Hutcherson, a bunch of entertainers too. But what was so powerful is like Eric Ross told me, okay, there's black people living up on that mountain. And I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. But as we drove, Saturday morning, people are out doing their, washing the cars or doing their lawns or meeting neighbors, and they're black people. And I'm like, oh my God. And I want to jump out of the car and go kiss them. But I didn't. And they have held on to their property, to
Right.
their legacy all of these years. Oh my gosh. And that was where, in 1889, John Brown's youngest son, who had been on the raid with him, his name was Owen Brown. Owen Brown was buried. He died and was buried. And the pastor, then pastor of the First African Methodist Episcopal Church, did his eulogy.
Wow.
The church was opened in 1888. And in 1889, there are all of these people who mourning Owen Brown, surrounding his black wife.
Wow.
Eric has graced me with a picture of that. So we went to the church, and there is a heritage society. They're putting together a book. They're putting together a movie, documentary. And as I talked with some of the people, so they're like, so what are you doing here? And I said, I'm a tourist. Wow. I said, are you kidding? You got to know, I gave them my card, and then they kind of got a little bit more interested. But I gave them my Black Bears tour card. But one lady has been a member of the church for 20 years. She never knew. She did not know the history.
Wow.
Oh. Okay. So we're not doing pictures this time, but eventually we're going to do this story again, and we're going to do it with pictures. We're still learning how to live stream. The other thing is that we left. We went to Jackie Robinson Memorial Park, and we went to Gamble House. It amazes me that we can live in communities and not know the significance of those communities. And it also amazes me how, when we do, it gives you a new kind of like, hey,
Yeah.
I know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I know who we've been all this time. So we went to Gamble House. Eric wanted us to go to Gamble House, which was launched, I think, with the Southern Pacific Railroad. A lot of the industrialists left Newport, Rhode Island, left New York, left Connecticut, and came west to California. And Pasadena, Altadena, because it was up in the mountains, had clear, sweet air. And so and they built huge mansions like they had in Newport, Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who worked for them were the people that they could trust to bring their things from the East Coast in trucks and wagons. And they hired a lot of the Black people. And they were their trusted concierge, not my slave, not my enslaved person, not my undervalued person, but the people that we trust to do what we need to have done. Mm-hmm. So as this, we went to Gamble House, started by the family that started Procter and Gamble.
Right.
And we missed the Bush House. The Bush House was started by the family that started Anheuser-Busch. Mm-hmm. And at the Gamble House, they were talking about the bookstore had pictures of Back to the Future, that movie from way, way long time ago.
I remember.
Yeah. And they were talking about Back to the Future because part of the movie was filmed at the Gamble House. And so there was a woman who was going to lead a tour. She had a couple of people. They were from Connecticut. I went up. She says, "Oh, you're going to take our tour?" I was like, "No, I'm here just to look around." And she started talking about Back to the Future. I was like, well, "Are you going to tell them about Procter and Gamble and the wealthy family?" She was like, "No." Like, what a wasted opportunity. Because these houses are the pride of this area. Did I say house? These mansions
Yes.
are the pride of this area. So I once more appreciated being able to go back into the real history. Okay, then the last thing. Anything you want to talk about with that, Miguel?
Yeah, you remind me the whole thing with Owen Brown. I just am watching a documentary or documentaries on uh, um, an incident that happened during the Civil War, in which it's called the Free State of Jones in Mississippi, where some Confederate soldiers who didn't own slaves, and they were poor, they were kept getting sent out to war. They realized, hey, we're dying for this is a rich man's war. It was particularly when the rich men were exempted if they had an X amount of slaves. So they decided we don't want anything to do with this. They started to do guerrilla tactics against the Confederacy, joined the Union unofficially, and they allowed, at least the story goes, because a lot of it's legend now because so many records have been lost. They allowed in uh, runaway enslaved Africans.
Yes.
And this small town today has a great deal of family members that are both black, white, and everything in between. And they're all related to this one man. His last name is Knight.
Yeah.
And who he's hated by the Confederacy and those Confederates. But it's and the documentary I watched, they talked about how for a long time the white side didn't talk to the black side because of the whole issues with Jim Crow. And only recently now they're like, oh, I went to school with you. I didn't know you were my family. I always felt like you were family, but I didn't know it. And it's really sad to see that I think understanding our history too is also understanding that there are ties that we have made with each other that often when we talk about each other, it's from a distance. Them. No, I don't think so much in the American community. I think we're pretty open about that. But I think the white community is a little bit more standoffish about it. So it's nice to see that mend, but it's really sad that, for 80, 90 years, 100 years, you couldn't even really say, hey, that's my cousin.
Yeah.
That's tragic. So anyway, you made me think of that when you were mentioning about Owen Brown and his black wife.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who are watching, if you'd like to get more information about this, please go on Black Paris Tours. We have a Facebook page, Black Paris Tours. We're going to put some stuff on Instagram too. But this was just heaven, going to Altadena, which is the top of the summit of that mountain, Brown Mountain, as it's known, and Pasadena, and how the Black people still have kept their property.
It's amazing.
It's just powerful. And some of them know the history, some of them don't. They just know that they have ancestral property that their great, great, great grandparents have up in the hills that are now very shishi.
Wow.
Yeah. It was just outrageously wonderful. The last thing is that when we left Pasadena, Altadena, we went down to Los Angeles and to Central Avenue, the historic Central Avenue in Los Angeles. And that was the first really hopping successful Black business community. And what I can remember is going down there when I was a child. My Aunt Dee Dee lived not in that area, but my father's family lived in the Crenshaw. They had gas stations. And Dee Dee lived near what is now USC campus. But I had never been to Central Avenue. Central Avenue and 42nd, 43rd Street. There is a 6-block Central Avenue historical stroll.
Wow.
Where they have plaques and informational stanchions that point out all of the businesses that we had.
Wow.
The Dunbar Hotel that was actually started by a very wealthy Black businessman. Started out as the Somerville Hotel, and then it changed to the Dunbar Hotel. So this is what would happen. My mother, the professional dancer, I have a picture of my mother and my father partying at the Dunbar in the 1940s. But when it was opened in 1928, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois went there. And he was just overwhelmed by the beauty, the architecture of this glorious hotel. It had 115 rooms. It had beautiful bathrooms. It had conference rooms and meeting areas and a restaurant that's now been opened again. And it's been through several it's been through several renovations, but it's just beautiful. And there's another place where the Black Panthers had their offices and a building. Another place where First American Insurance, the first major Black American-owned insurance company was there. Oh, heaven. If you know, when we go places, when we know who we are, it changes the whole feeling. And for me to go back to an area where I can say, here's a picture of my parents partying
Right.
in this hotel.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of the entertainers, they'd be in New York, Chicago, Detroit, Central Avenue in LA, Ellington, Count Basie, Cab Calloway, Billie Holiday. It was just like all the jazz greats, people I had never even heard of, but all of the jazz greats. And then there was a high school, a very famous high school. And that high school, I don't know if it's Jefferson or Roosevelt, but that high school had a Black teacher. He was the first Black teacher in Los Angeles public schools. And he was a music teacher. And he made a serious goal to teach them about their history and music. And then out of that high school came all of these jazz musicians. So it was just, oh my God, it was just wonderful. So that's what we do in Paris. And someone is telling, I wrote about it so much, a friend was saying, well, you need to do a tour in LA. I'm like, no, the traffic is so bad, we'd be standing on the corner.
Yeah.
But at some point, I hope that there will be a Black LA tour and a Black Pasadena, Altadena tour. And it changes your life when you travel.
Yeah.
It changes your life.
Because it expands your mind, right? And, one of the things I've been told very often on the tours, they're like, Miguel, I didn't know that there are that many Black people in France. So, when you travel, you get to see something beyond just what you're given by the media that we consume. The media that we consume is a recreated version of reality. So when you travel, you get to actually see, oh, there are Black people in Italy, there are Black people in Spain, there are Black people here, there, and you start to realize, wow, well, this doesn't really kind of match up to what I've been seeing on the TV the whole time.
Yes.
So it's important.
It is exceedingly important. I'm going to encourage those of you who are watching us now. We have a Black Paris Tour Facebook page. I have a personal Facebook page. It's much more political. Okay. I'll just say that up front. But I've put the family things, and I think I'm going to put all the things about Pasadena on my Ricky Stevenson Facebook page. But I'm just in heaven having had that opportunity. And there were so many Black towns in Southern California, because that Los Angeles was founded by 10 families.
Yep.
5 of them were Black, 5 of them were Hispanic, but they were dark Hispanics. So they had been part of that mixture that came out of Veracruz. La Jolla, California, founded by 5 Black families. Julian, California, a town called Julian down near San Diego, a
Right.
Black gold mining town. It's now a yuppie apple pie. That's what they do. They have big apple orchards. But there are so many places
Mhm.
throughout the United States that contain our history.
Well,
Our history did not begin with enslavement. Please understand that and teach your children that. Teach your children. So I can't think of anything else, Miguel. We
well, I
got,
was just going to point out California is named after African goddess.
that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the Golden State, the state that everybody wants to come to. Oh, by the way, it was really funny. Eric was telling us that it wasn't until the railroad, the Southern Pacific Railroad came, and I think that might have been in the 18, I'm not exactly sure of the date, the Southern Pacific. But he said things were pretty cool between the blacks and whites in Altadena, Pasadena, until the railroad came. And that brought a whole bunch of ignorant white people who didn't understand the dynamics of the town and of the interaction between the blacks who were there first, the Mexicans, the Native Americans, and the whites that would come following them.
Right.
So it was
because they were dumping out their poor from the East Coast,
yes.
And that's what the plan was from the beginning. That caused a lot of friction between the South and the North.
Yes,
whereas the South wanted more plantations, but
mm-hmm.
That's a whole other
Miguel, as we wrap up, would you tell us about your latest podcast?
Oh yes, my latest podcast is going to be. For those who don't know the name of the show, it's Fantastically Terrible. And this latest podcast, we cover different topics, but this week we're covering the term sub-Saharan African and how it's made up and how it's divisionary and it's racist. And we go into a lot because there has been, I wouldn't say, a need. There's been a need to cleave the North from the southern part of the continent in order to say, okay, well, they're lighter, therefore this is why Egypt wasn't Black African.
Yes.
So, and I've had many discussions with people and I got tired of it. So I decided that we should do something on that because there's this crazy idea that, yes, there are many different cultures in Africa. There's 54 different countries, but they all interact. Perfect example is the Fulani. The Fulani are nomadic. They're known to travel from as far up as Egypt all the way to West Africa. So this idea that there is some sort of disconnect because of the Sahara Desert is a complete lie. Yeah. So we go into that this week, talking about that.
Yeah.
So.
And I know, having living in Saudi Arabia for a while on the East Coast, close to Dammam, and when I would go out, when I would figure out, okay, I can go out now, it was hot. Oh my God, it was hot. And I'd go out, and sometimes I would put on a scarf just to be polite. And most of the time I didn't have to. But the people would be excited. They were like, "Are you Nubian?" I was like, "I guess so." The Saudis, they were like, "Yeah, all right, one of our Nubian sister." I'm like, "Okay, I'm a Nubian princess," and that was hilarious. But for the most part, they look like us anyway. But if you could prove, that was the funny thing. But then I later found out, if you could prove that your ancestry went back to Sudan, which are the blackest, some of the most beautiful people, the Sudanese, the Nubians, the people of Kush, you got extra points in Saudi Arabia. They would be like, oh. So, we have to fight against those who would seek to divide us based on, okay, they were all, that teacher, my teacher when I was in the 5th grade who said, oh no, Egypt wasn't a part of Africa. And I was like, that's wrong. And she called my parents.
Right.
My parents gave her a book. Something's wrong with you if you don't know that.
it's still a big problem. In the archaeology in academia, they're fighting it. A lot of the young archaeologists are fighting that because that's been so
Ingrained.
just ingrained. And one of the key archaeologists, and his name really escapes me, he's also responsible for adopting a lot of phrenology, which is the study of the skull. And
Yes.
he used that as a way to say, well, you see the skull shape, they weren't black, which is, we know it's a pseudoscience now, but it's so ingrained that you can have arguments with people over Egypt being African or not, and it's absurd.
Mm.
We know that all human life comes from Africa, and we know that the Sahara Desert was a rainforest. So you're just not going to leave a really nice, beautiful place to go hang out in a desert and then come back. You're going to be hanging out there. So it's this idea that we somehow left this beautiful place. It was uninhabited, and then they come back to, no, it just doesn't. No,
Mhm.
it
It
just
doesn't wash.
no, it doesn't wash. So,
Miguel, I know you have to move. You have to talk to your dad. Tell
yes,
him we send our highest and our best.
thank you.
And we just are so happy that he had you.
I'll let him know that too.
And for those of you, please check out Ricky Stevenson on Facebook and on Black Paris Tour on Facebook. And I'm going to be speaking at AMLO this weekend on Saturday. And it's going to be like an hour and a half virtual tour. And it should be interesting. It should be very interesting. And you can get the link on my Ricky Stevenson or Black Paris Tour Facebook page. Miguel, I'm gonna be watching the podcast.
Okay,
All
okay.
right. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you again next Wednesday, maybe a little earlier. And
Okay.
for those of you who've joined us today, thank you. I hope this has brought something to you that you can say, I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay, that's it for Black Paris Tours. Bye.
Tout à l'heure.
À tout à l'heure, Miguel.